it is just merely asserted from the religious point of view that 3-day-old human embryos have souls. You have souls in the petri dish, you have souls in the little girl with diabetes. You can't, the interest of, who can weigh the interest of one soul against another? You just have to respect the faith proposition that life starts at the moment of conception, whatever that means. Well, let's talk about the details for a second. Perhaps it sounds scary to destroy human embryos. A 3-day-old human embryo is a collection of 150 cells. They're arranged in a sphere. There's no brain. There's no nervous system. Maybe 150 cells sounds like a lot of cells. There are 100,000 cells in the brain of a fly. Flies have brains. They have neurons. They have neurons very much like our own. If we know anything at all about the relationship between physical complexity and the possibility of having experience, and the possibility of having interests, we know that more suffering is visited upon this earth every time we swat a fly than when we kill a 3-day-old human embryo. It's not enough to say they're potential human beings. Given the advances in genetic engineering, every cell in the human body with a nucleus is a potential human being given the right manipulation. Every time the president scratches his nose, he's engaged in a holocaust of potential human beings.
I'd like to take a moment, as many people have, to just acknowledge the void that is left by the death of our friend Hitch. While it might be possible to guess what he would have thought about a number of the topics raised here, it's almost impossible to imagine how well he would have expressed those thoughts. The man had more wit and style and substance than a few civilizations I could name. To not believe in God is to know that it falls to us to make the world a better place. We have barely emerged from centuries of barbarism. It's not a surprise that there are shocking inequities in this world. It is hard work to climb down out of the trees, walk upright, and build a viable global civilization when you start with technology that's made of rocks and sticks and fur. This is a project, and progress is difficult. Just picture going back 100 generations within your own family. I mean, just picture it kind of mapped onto this room, maybe this front row. Just 100 people. Your father's fathers, mother's fathers, mother's fathers' fathers, on back. Now, I don't care how cultured you are, how well-educated your family. You can be Matthew Chapman, whose great-great-grandfather was Charles Darwin. But if you just keep going, in no more than 100 conversations, you are going to meet someone who thinks that sacrificing your firstborn child just might be a good way to control the weather. It is. Some of you probably don't have to go back quite that far. You just have to go home for Christmas.
Founder of Project Reason and New York Times best-selling author of The Moral Landscape, How Science Can Determine Human Values. Sam Harris. Thanks for being here, Sam.
Thank you.
So, how crazy is Pastor Terry Jones?
Well, he might be crazy. He's not crazy about Islam, however. I mean, it's inconvenient for our democracy that only our own religious demagogues are making sense and speaking candidly about the nature of Islam. The problem is we have this one word, religion, which everyone wants to think names a unified domain of doctrines, but religion is a word like sports. There are sports like badminton, and there are sports like Thai boxing, and they basically have nothing in common apart from breathing. And we have to be honest about the actual doctrine of Islam, specifically about the doctrines of martyrdom and jihad. And only our own religious lunatics, frankly, are incessantly honest about the liabilities of these ideas. And we have people like Mayor Bloomberg saying that 9/11 had nothing to do with Islam, and Islam is a religion of peace. And that is that is delusional on its face, and I think it's a destabilizing lie that we can't keep telling ourselves.
Now, someone like Pastor Jones can be, in your view, right about Islam, but what animates him is a defensive competitiveness about his own religion. Mine's better than yours. My religion's better than yours, and here's how crazy your religion is. I mean, that's what directs his thinking, right?
Yeah, no, he's right for the wrong reasons, and this is something that should trouble us. I'm worried about living in a world where the only people who are certain of moral truth are religious demagogues who think the universe is 6,000 years old, and that we'll have faith playing both sides of the board in a very dangerous game. We have to talk honestly about human well-being and about the factors that encourage it, and so Pastor Jones is not well equipped to do that. He's well equipped to notice that the jihadists really believe what they say they believe, and they're blowing themselves up and infringing on the rights of women based on their beliefs and not based on economic problems or our own missteps in our war on terror. But we should be talking about nuclear proliferation and climate change and education and poverty, not about things like gay marriage, which I'm sure Pastor Jones is also exercised by. And, you know, we shouldn't be watching cartoonists have their lives threatened by people who can't tolerate jokes about the Prophet Muhammad.
Now, Ron Paul has been very clear on this subject. He says the outcry over the building of the mosque near Ground Zero implies that Islam was alone responsible for the 9/11 attacks. He says this is like blaming all Christians for the wars of aggression and occupation because some Christians supported the neoconservatives' aggressive wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Right. Well, it would be great if that were true. Unfortunately,
What's not true about that?
Well, the problem is that Osama bin Laden is giving a very plausible interpretation of Islam. He's not the Reverend Jim Jones of the
People
Muslim.
say, oh, he's distorting the text, and Islam doesn't say that. You say Islam does say what Osama bin Laden says it does.
Yes. Now, that you can split some hairs and talk about just when should an apostate be killed, but the crime of apostasy is punishable by death in Islam. There's no version of Islam which says you should be free to criticize the Quran. It's just the product of human minds. The Prophet Muhammad was a man like any other man and can be criticized. I mean, there's no Reform Judaism version of Islam, and we have to encourage.
But there is there are moderate Muslims.
Well, I should be clear. In criticizing Islam, I'm not criticizing all Muslims. There are Muslims who don't take the doctrine very seriously. There are Muslims who don't read the Quran with any attention.
Same thing in every religion.
Yes, yes. But Islam is at a very different moment in its history, and it's as though we're encountering the Christians of the 14th century, armed with 21st century weapons. We have a real problem with Islam, and it's not an accident that we're not having this conversation about the Amish or Quakers or Jains or even Buddhists. I mean, ideas have consequences, and the idea that you can get to paradise by dying in defense of the faith, in fact, dying in defense of the faith is the best thing that can possibly happen to you, that is a mainstream notion in Islam.
Is there any lesson in how Catholicism worked its way through its homicidal phase of a couple of centuries for present-day Islamic extremists?
Yeah, the problem is we just don't have 500 years to work it out. We were burning heretics alive for 5 centuries in Europe, and it's understandable based on a certain reading of the Bible. We have incredibly destructive technology spreading all over the world, and it's getting increasingly easy for one person to screw up life for millions. And so, I think we have some decades at best to get straight about this and to build a viable global civilization which is compatible with human well-being. And religious demagoguery of any kind is the worst piece of software to have running on your brain when it comes time to actually engage that challenge.
Sam Harris, author of The Moral Landscape, thanks for joining me in the studio tonight.
Thank you so much.
Many people claim to find it impossible to believe or to imagine that they won't exist after death. Just try it for a second. I mean, you imagine that everyone in Paris right now is getting along fine without all of us. I mean, none of us are in Paris. We are really, really materially absent from whatever is going on in every other city on this planet right now. You were absent for all of human history before your birth. The idea that you simply can't imagine not existing after death is really kind of just for lack of trying, I think. The deeper point here, and this is where the whole style and content of what you're saying is so deeply unscientific, is that there's not a physicist sitting on this stage right now. Okay, I would never be tempted to lecture a room full of 1,000 people at Caltech about physics. I'm not a physicist. You're not a physicist. And basically every sentence demonstrates that you speak on the subject. Now,
9 million children die every year before they reach the age of 5. Okay, picture an Asian tsunami of the sort we saw in 2004 that killed 250,000 people. One of those every 10 days, killing children only under 5. Okay, it's 24,000 children a day, 1,000 an hour, 17 or so a minute. That means before I can get to the end of this sentence, some few children, very likely, will have died in terror and agony. Think of the parents of these children. Think of the fact that most of these men and women believe in God and are praying at this moment for their children to be spared. And their prayers will not be answered. Okay, but according to Dr. Craig, this is all part of God's plan. Any God who would allow children by the millions to suffer and die in this way, and their parents to grieve in this way, either can do nothing to help them or doesn't care to. He is therefore either impotent or evil. And worse than that, on Dr. Craig's view, most of these people, many of these people certainly, will be going to hell because they're praying to the wrong God. Just think about that. Okay, through no fault of their own, they were born into the wrong culture where they got the wrong theology and they missed the revelation. Okay, there are 1.2 billion people in India at this moment. Most of them are Hindus, most of them therefore polytheists. Okay, in Dr. Craig's universe, no matter how good these people are, they are doomed. If you are praying to the monkey god Hanuman, you are doomed. You will be tortured in hell for eternity. Now, is there the slightest evidence for this? No. It just says so in Mark 9 and Matthew 13 and Revelation 14. Okay, so God created the cultural isolation of the Hindus. Okay, He engineered the circumstance of their deaths in ignorance of revelation. And then He created the penalty for this ignorance, which is an eternity of conscious torment in fire. Okay, on the other hand, on Dr. Craig's account, your run-of-the-mill serial killer in America, okay, who spent his life raping and torturing children, need only come to God, come to Jesus on death row, and after a final meal of fried chicken, he's going to spend an eternity in heaven after death. Okay, one thing should be crystal clear to you. This vision of life has absolutely nothing to do with moral accountability. Okay, and please notice the double standard that people like Dr. Craig use to exonerate God from all this evil. Okay, we're told that God is loving and kind and just and intrinsically good, but when someone like myself points out the rather obvious and compelling evidence that God is cruel and unjust because He visits suffering on innocent people of a scope and scale that would embarrass the most ambitious psychopath. Okay? We're told that God is mysterious. Okay? Who can understand God's will? Okay? And yet this is precisely, this merely human understanding of God's will is precisely what believers use to establish His goodness in the first place. You know, something good happens to a Christian. He feels some bliss while praying, say, or he sees some positive change in his life. And we're told that God is good.
Okay? But when children by the tens of thousands are torn from their parents' arms and drowned, we're told that God is mysterious. Okay? This is how you play tennis without the net. Okay? And I want to suggest to you that it is not only tiresome when otherwise intelligent people speak this way, it is morally reprehensible. Okay? This kind of faith is really the perfection of narcissism. I mean, God loves me, don't you know? He cured me of my eczema. He makes me feel so good while singing in church. And just when we had given up hope, he found a banker who was willing to reduce my mother's mortgage. Okay. Given all that this God of yours does not accomplish in the lives of others, given the misery that's being imposed on some helpless child at this instant, this kind of faith is obscene. Okay, to think in this way is to fail to reason honestly or to care sufficiently about the suffering of other human beings. And if God is good and loving and just and kind, and he wanted to guide us morally with a book, why give us a book that supports slavery? Why give us a book that admonishes us to kill people for imaginary crimes like witchcraft? Now, of course, there's a way of not taking these questions to heart. Okay, according to Dr. Craig's divine command theory, God is not bound by moral duties. God doesn't have to be good. Whatever he commands is good. So when he commands that the Israelites to slaughter the Amalekites, that behavior becomes intrinsically good because he commanded it. Okay, well, here we're being offered, I'm glad he raised the issue of psychopathy, we're being offered a psychopathic and psychotic moral attitude. It's psychotic because this is completely delusional. There's no reason to believe that we live in a universe ruled by an invisible monster, Yahweh. But it is psychopathic because this is a total detachment from the well-being of human beings. This so easily rationalizes the slaughter of children. Okay, just think about the Muslims at this moment who are blowing themselves up, okay, convinced that they are agents of God's will. There is absolutely nothing that Dr. Craig can say against their behavior in moral terms, apart from his own faith-based claim that they're praying to the wrong God. Okay, if they had the right God, what they were doing would be good on divine command theory. Now, I'm obviously not saying that Dr. Craig or all religious people are psychopaths and psychotics, but this, to me, is the true horror of religion. Okay, it allows perfectly decent and sane people to believe by the billions what only lunatics could believe on their own. Okay, if you wake up tomorrow morning thinking that saying a few Latin words over your pancakes is going to turn them into the body of Elvis Presley, okay, you have lost your mind. Okay. But if you think more or less the same thing about a cracker and the body of Jesus, you're just a Catholic. And I'm not the first person to notice that it's a very strange sort of loving God who would make salvation depend on believing in him on bad evidence. Okay, I mean, if you lived 2,000 years ago, there was evidence galore. I mean, he was just performing miracles. But apparently he got tired of being so helpful. Okay, and so now we all inherit this very heavy burden of the doctrine's implausibility. And the effort to square it with what we now know about the cosmos and what we know about the all-too-human origins of Scripture becomes more and more difficult. Okay, and it's not just the generic God that Dr. Craig is recommending. It is God the Father and Jesus the Son. Okay, Christianity, on Dr. Craig's account, is the true moral wealth of the world. Well, I hate to break it to you here at Notre Dame, but Christianity is a cult of human sacrifice. Okay, Christianity is not a religion that repudiates human sacrifice. It is a religion that celebrates a single human sacrifice as though it were effective. God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. John 3:16. Okay, the idea is that Jesus suffered the crucifixion, so that none need suffer hell, except those billions in India and billions like them throughout history. Okay, this is astride. This doctrine is astride a contemptible history of scientific ignorance and religious barbarism. We come from people who used to bury children under the foundations of new buildings as offerings to their imaginary gods. I mean, just think about that. In vast numbers of societies, people would bury children in post holes, people like ourselves thinking that this would prevent an invisible being from knocking down their buildings. Okay. These are the sorts of people who wrote the Bible. Okay. If there is a less moral framework than the one Dr. Craig is proposing, I haven't heard of it.
It's true that some people define God as pure consciousness or as being synonymous with the laws of nature. But if we talk about consciousness and the laws of nature, we won't be talking about the God that most of our neighbors believe in, which is a personal God who hears our prayers and occasionally answers them. So I just want you to be sensitive to this, because if Michael or I say something derogatory about Islam or Christianity, which seems possible, the response from the other side shouldn't mention quantum mechanics. And it shouldn't reference a notion of God that is so denuded of doctrine as to more or less be synonymous with pure mystery or pure information or pure energy or pure anything. So I wanted to plant a flag there where you all can see it. Because the God that our neighbors believe in is essentially an invisible person. He is a creator deity who created the universe to have a relationship with one species of primate. Lucky us. and he's got galaxy upon galaxy to attend to, but he's especially concerned with what we do, and he's especially concerned with what we do while naked. And he almost certainly disapproves of homosexuality. And he's created this cosmos as a vast laboratory in which to test our powers of credulity. And the test is this: can you believe in this God on bad evidence? Which is to say, on faith. And if you can, you will win an eternity of happiness after you die. And it's precisely this sort of God and this sort of scheme that you must believe in if you're going to have any kind of future in politics in this country. No matter what your gifts. I mean, you could be an unprecedented genius. You could look like George Clooney. You could have $1 billion, and you could have the social skills of Oprah. And you are going nowhere in politics in this country unless you believe in that sort of God.
What scientific proof or evidence of any sort can you muster to support your assertion that there is, for lack of a better term, God or some sort of intelligence at the heart of the universe?
Okay, what scientific proof? I think science is, and again, in deference to Sam Harris, he said, don't go the way of quantum physics. I think I'm going to have to say that science is now in a process of overthrowing the climactic overthrow of the superstition of materialism. That everything that we call matter comes from something that is not material. That the essential nature of the physical world is that it's not physical. That the essential stuff of the universe is non-stuff. Call it what you will. And science also tells us, and if there are any scientists who want to disagree with them, please come up during the question and answer session. Science tells us that nature is a discontinuity, that it's an on-off phenomenon, that there are gaps between every two ons, where you find a field of possibilities, a field of pure potentiality. Science doesn't call it God, but what is God if not the immeasurable potential of all that was, all that is, and all that will be? Science also tells us that this is a field of non-locality, where everything is correlated with everything else. My adversaries are going to point out, no, everything, God is explained by neurology. Well, I hope today, Michael, that you will convert from a skeptic to a neuroskeptic, because your science is really frozen in the dungeons of conservatism and in the dungeons of orthodoxy. Today, science tells us that the essential nature of reality is non-local correlation. Everything is connected to everything else. That there's hidden creativity, there are quantum leaps of creativity, that there's something called the observer effect, where intention orchestrates space-time events, which we then measure as movement and motion and energy and matter. And addressing Sam, we can have a personal relationship with this intelligence, because we have a consciousness that is part of this sea of consciousness. Rumi, the great Sufi poet, said, you're not just a drop in the ocean, you're the mighty ocean in the drop. And all you have to do is understand the principles of science and understand that you have within you the resources to intuitively grasp this mystery. But one of the things we have to do today...
Did you hear anything in there that convinces you?
You asked, Dan, what I meant by woo-woo. That is the very embodiment of woo-woo. He said, stringing together at a rapid patter of a bunch of scientific-sounding words sprinkled in with some spiritual New Age words doesn't mean anything. I mean, just take just one example of this non-local quantum effects. We're all connected. No, this is not true. When quantum physicists talk about non-locality and the interconnectedness of things, they're talking about things at the quantum level.
Wait, well, let me just stop you for a second, because I will play the dummy tonight, because it's not a hard role for me to assume. What does non-local mean? I mean, I kind of understand what quantum physics means, but just give it to me really simple.
Okay. There's this very simple two-slit experiment where you fire these photons through, and if you just have two streams of light, they form a little interference wave pattern, like throwing two rocks in a pond.
You've already confused.
Okay, and so yeah, you want to interrupt?
He's getting into the woo now.
No, this is just you. Okay, what he means by
guys with woo-woo.
What he means by non-local is that everything in the universe is interconnected, and it just is not true. It just isn't.
And there's no reason to think that it's active at the level of the brain. That non-locality is a principle that is working. Hold on, Deepak, you spoke for quite some time. The deeper point to make here, and what is...
But I want to address that brain thing that you just said.
Okay, no, you might not have to, because the deeper point here, and this is where the whole style and content of what you're saying is so deeply unscientific, is that there's not a physicist sitting on this stage right now. Okay, I would never be tempted to lecture a room full of 1,000 people at Caltech about physics. I'm not a physicist. You're not a physicist. And basically every sentence demonstrates that you speak on the subject. Please don't take this as ad hominem. I mean, I'm talking about specifically what you said. But the fact, what you do and what many people who try to invoke spooky physics do in the service of propping up their religious and New Age intuitions is that they think that because what you're saying, because quantum mechanics is spooky and difficult to understand, and because what you're saying is spooky and difficult to understand, they must somehow be related, or they must somehow be mutually supportive. And that's fundamentally not true. They are arrived at by completely different methodologies and ways of thinking and criteria of discursive evidence. What a mystic, I've studied with great mystics. I've met great meditation masters who've spent 20 years in caves perfecting the kinds of techniques of meditation that you would adopt or recommend. They don't know a damn thing about physics. And they're not interested, for the most part, in physics. I mean, there's nothing about sitting in a cave and granted, having incredibly useful and even normative experiences and transforming your way of life and transforming your moment-to-moment perception of the world. There's nothing about that project that makes you a theoretical physicist. And so these are completely different language games. They're completely, and you have just merged them together in a very unprincipled way. And you're getting
well, no, I take resentment at your questioning my scientific credentials. In fact, if anyone on this stage is more scientifically credentialed, it's me. I took physics, chemistry, biology. I'm an MD. I'm a neuroendocrinologist. And I want to object to your saying that brain does not obey non-locality. You know, when you right now, when you're thinking right now, 100 trillion neurons are phase locking and frequency locking in simultaneously. Is that non-locality or not?
Okay.
Can I just have...
I just want to quote from Einstein. Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. From Stephen Hawking. It would be very difficult to explain why the universe would have begun in just this way, except as the act of a God who intended to create beings like us.
But Hawking's an atheist.
Please
They're using
look up those
This is a direct quote.
So what? He has stated, Hawking has stated on this very stage, he does not believe in God.
Why, he doesn't believe in the dead white male that you're talking about, the straw man that you have put up, or the mythical God that Sam Harris is talking
The God
about.
you put up is a meaningless, non-local God.
No, I just said, this is also the God that gives us inspiration, insight, creativity, free will, conscious choice making, imagination. Are your neurons doing that, or are you doing that?
As just a point of process here,
Well,
could you
then you're a
could you
zombie.
dial it down just a little bit? First of all, I invite everyone to look up that Einstein quote in Ideas and Opinions. Read it in context. It'll be absolutely obvious. It can't be pressed into the service that you just witnessed. Einstein complained about this treatment of his metaphorical use of the word God and the few things he said about religion. And you can look that up in Richard Dawkins' book. This is a game. And it's a game that is designed for export to people who don't know much science and don't know how science is done. And you missed the point of, I wasn't criticizing your scientific credentials. You're an endocrinologist. You're an MD. You're not a theoretical physicist. The way science is done is
I invite theoretical physicists in this audience to actually address these questions.
Okay, so a theoretical physicist will be comfortable talking with real confidence in a very narrow band of his expertise, and he will be exquisitely sensitive to the fact that when he's in a room like this, or she, sorry. I'll just proceed with he just for simplicity's sake here. He will be exquisitely sensitive to the fact that whenever he opens his mouth in a room like this, he is guaranteed to be speaking in front of half a dozen people who know more on any given issue than he does. The great irony of the popular conception of science as arrogant is that when you go to a scientific meeting, you don't see arrogance. I mean, you're about as likely to see real arrogance as you're likely to see nudity at a scientific conference. I mean, this is people are constantly offering caveats and hedges toward what they say. Every statement is couched in, I'm sure there's someone in the room who knows more about this than me, but because everyone is desperate to avoid public embarrassment. Now, this seems to be something you're not doing.